Welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Peter Willing and thank you for joining us. Today we have episode 5 in our battery supply chain series. And joining us we have Isabel Sheldon, Chief Strategy Officer for BritishVolt, Jeremy Ruthall, isn't it? If I'm correct, sorry Jeremy, Founder and Chief Executive of Cornish Lithium, Daniel Bloor from Livista, who's Chief Executive, and the last but by no means least, if I can get my words all to come out correctly together, is David Davis from SAPE, who will also be moderating this particular session. There is an opportunity for everyone viewing to raise questions on the platform, and they will then filter through to our panelists. So without further ado, thanks very much for taking the lead on this, David, and I hand everything over to you. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks very much, Peter, and thank you to Automotive EV for setting up this opportunity for us all. So we're here to talk about the rise of the Gigafactories with electric vehicles, battery manufacturing. Their supply chains are central to our journey to net zero carbon that everyone's talking about. And as these gigafactories rise, some of those companies and their supply chain partners are taking leadership roles to ensure the security, visibility, and efficiency in raw material supply chains are there. And it's a vital piece of this journey to make sure that we actually realize our net zero goals and provide the visibility that we need for our ESG related activities to secure the economic and market positioning advantage that they promise. And do the right thing for the world, for the companies, for the industries and the locations. We're very lucky to be joined today by a group of companies who are some of the companies leading in this space. And we're going to have this deeper discussion on the successful rise of the Gigafactory. So first of all, I'd like to give our panelists an opportunity for a 2-minute introduction each. So welcome firstly to Isabel Sheldon, OPE, Chief Strategy Officer at BritishVolt. Perhaps you'd like to give us your 2-minute introduction to yourself and to BritishVolt.
Yes, of course. So I've been in the lithium-ion battery industry for nearly 20 years now. I was one of the first people to put lithium-ion cells in cars and run them around. And I have my own startup business for 10 years and achieved a couple of world firsts, like the highest power density battery in the world at the time, the first 12-meter electric bus, and then moved on senior positions with Ricardo, Johnson Matthey, Cummins, and then the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, where I was part of the executive team before joining BritishVolt. So BritishVolt has really been established to set up a large-scale manufacturing facility, primarily in the UK at first, but also looking at a global footprint. And we're offering services and engineering services and sales out to the wider automotive industry, and very much tailoring the solution to make sure that we can meet our customers' brand attributes and their performance criteria. When you walk into a car showroom, you expect a BMW to drive like a BMW and a Jaguar Land Rover, a Land Rover to drive like a Land Rover. And you have to fundamentally make sure the cells are matched up to those application requirements to make sure that the people walking into the showrooms buy the cars they want. So we'll be setting up our first 10 gigawatt hours worth of manufacturing capacity at the end of 2023. And then adding another 10 gigawatt hours in 2025, and then a final third 10 gigawatt hours in 2027 to make 30 gigawatt hours in total. And we'll also be including a co-located localized supply chain to support the plant. So really looking forward to the discussion this afternoon, David, and with the other panelists as well.
Great, thank you, Isabel. It's very exciting. I'm sure many of the people on the webinar are well aware of the BritishVolt story, as they are, I would imagine, Cornish Lithium as well. And we're joined by Jeremy Ruthall, who's the founder and CEO of Cornish Lithium. Jeremy, perhaps you could do the same for us and give us your 2-minute introduction.
Sure, David, I'm happy to do that. So yeah, I'm Jeremy Ruthall. I'm the founder and CEO of Cornish Lithium, company I started in 2016. My background is as a mining engineer. Proudly went to study mining engineering at Camborne School of Mines in Cornwall, hence the Cornwall connection. Then worked in the mining industry for a few years before commencing an investment banking career, where I headed up various mining teams around the world and financed mines all over the place. So, but in 2016, I very much started to think about the material changes that were coming through to electric vehicles, to the electric vehicle supply chain, or to the supply chain as a whole, raw material supply chain. And remembered that a friend of mine had mentioned that lithium had been encountered in historic Cornish mines. I started researching that, realized that this is a potentially very large opportunity, particularly lithium contained in water or brines, and started to build the company, pick up mineral rights, and really explore what that industry could become. And that's grown and grown and grown. We now have also working on a rock project as well, extracting lithium from rock, and really believe that we could certainly produce some of the requirement for the UK's lithium for lithium-ion batteries. So a really exciting opportunity. It's been an amazing journey, and we're making good progress. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Very exciting to continue watching the progress. Thank you, Jeremy. Finally, on the panel, we've got Daniel Bloor, who's the CEO of Livista Energy, joining us as well. Daniel, would you like to give us an introduction and tell us how Livista fits into the picture here?
Yeah, perfect. Cheers, David. Yeah, much like Jeremy, I came from a mining background. I started my career out in Australia, where we were looking at a lot of different minerals, but ended up ultimately in Hong Kong, where I was working on outbound Chinese and Asian investment into battery metals. So not too dissimilar. So for about 10 years now, I've had the privilege of seeing just how seriously Asia's took the battery metal space, the investment, and what they've done to try and securitize that supply chain. And ultimately ended up in Africa, where we were drilling for other commodities. But it was about the time where Europe was around 18 months ago, starting to look interesting. Legislation was changing, the narrative was changing. Companies like Jeremy, there at Cornish Lithium, and of course BritishVolt, were creating new stories here in Europe. And we saw there was a gap in the market. And basically, you know, you've got raw materials, you've got demand, and that demand is going to grow from negligible today to a large number of demand by 2030, maybe 360,000 tons, depending on the gigafactories that are being built. And it's not going to be all come exclusively from Europe. I think there's a space there for somebody to sit in the middle and convert and upgrade products, and they're able to produce enough material for that demand. And Livista was born to meet that gap. So we've been on it for about 18 months now, working with a lot of projects all around the globe, as well as in Europe. And our idea is to get about 40,000 tons of lithium chemicals for battery use into the market in 2024.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Well, before we get into the questions, I'm representing SAFE here, which SAFE is a consultancy which helps battery supply chain participants with their procurement strategies, processes and technologies around their raw material supply chains. Generally speaking, we help people create the tools they need to generate and maintain a competitive edge carrying out the operations. But more importantly, let's get into the discussion today. Bringing to the market local gigafactories while maintaining our ESG targets. Isabel, perhaps I can start with you. With the emergence of gigafactories in locations to support automotive industries, there's a lot of talk around the supply chains that will make them work. I wanted to ask you about, why do you think homegrown production is so important, and what do you think needs to be done to make sure that these new supply chains are robust, and which parts do you think are possible to co-locate close to the actual facilities?
It's a really, really good set of questions, David. And, the importance to the UK industry of putting a gigafactory here is, to protect that automotive industry. Now, we know that geographies are important. We need to put gigafactories in reasonable logistics distance of where the automotive facilities are. But you don't just put them right next to the car manufacturing plant. You actually put the gigafactory where you can find the renewables, because this ESG component of how the industry needs to shift and change moving forwards is becoming even more important than it has been in the past, and is becoming right at the top of the list of priorities for the automotive industry. And as far as the automotive industry in the UK is concerned, we're talking about an industry that's £82 billion worth of turnover. It represents £19 billion of gross value add to the UK economy. These are enormous numbers, 1 million jobs. 13% of all total UK exports are actually from the automotive industry. So we have to make sure that's supported. We have to make sure that we help that industry transition towards this electrified future. And a big part of that is reducing the carbon content. We can't continue to convert materials out in countries such as China and the Far East, where environmental controls are just not what they need to be. for us to enable to really call this a truly sustainable solution. So bringing those materials back to Europe is absolutely vital, and we have to feed them with renewable energy. And of course, the energy cost is much more expensive in Europe than it is in places like China. So we need to reimagine the manufacturing processes and make them much more efficient so that we can cope with that increase of energy cost. But we have an opportunity to take something like 70% of the carbon content out of the cell manufacturing industry if you include the supply chain. So what we've done at BritishVolt is we've said, okay, we need to have our supply chain close to us. We don't dig a lot of the minerals out of the ground here. Nickel is a good one, cobalt is another one. But we can start looking at some of those conversion processes and repatriating them back to the UK. And if we reimagine it, make it more efficient and more environmentally friendly, we're going to stand a chance to get the permitting to have those processes based here in the UK too. And if you add on top the fact that our site in Blyth has got a huge amount of renewables coming in on site, 1.4 gigawatt hours coming in, hydro from Norway, and 40 megawatt hours, soon to be 100 megawatt hours coming off offshore wind turbines, with the landing sites for those converter stations 400 to 500 meters away from the building, we're ideally placed to not only put the giga plant up, but actually get the supply chain co-located right next to the facility too.
Yeah, understood. It's interesting. I pick up on a couple of things you said about, changing markets and changing structures. We've got the electrification of the automotive industry going on. At the same time, much more attention on ESG footprints from investors and consumers. At the same time, the need to reimagine the supply chain and the value chain itself. Three big changes occurring concurrently. I think one of the things that we wanted to sort of talk about was, why is ESG so important? What's the fundamental underlying reason why ESG is so important to the battery material supply chain, and what do you think the opportunities and risks are? I think maybe Isabel, if you want to give it a quick shot and then fire that over to Jeremy, I'd be interested to hear what your two opinions are.
Yeah, of course. This whole EV revolution is coming about because we're becoming much more environmentally conscious, and regulation is driving that tailpipe emission reduction. But what we can't do is we can't replace tailpipe emissions with embedded carbon content emissions. So we have to really reimagine the supply chain and the manufacturing processes to make sure that it is a truly sustainable solution. And we are finding that the automotive industry is really waking up to those environmental, social and governance requirements. It's not just about emissions, it's about social responsibility and making sure that people in the supply chain are looked after and have a fair wage for the jobs that they do. And it's also making sure that we've got the reporting structures and the frameworks in place to make sure that we can report out accurately along standard lines. It's like the battery industry. I think Jeff Dan once said you have to take every claim and make sure it applies to the whole of the sentence when describing how a battery performs. We can pick and choose the bits that we want to put into this, and that's what's got us to where we are today. But we can't continue to greenwash it. We have to make sure that we have a fully responsible and ethical supply chain that's supplying this industry. I'll throw that over to
Well, it's interesting because Jeremy, you're at the other end of the supply chain, right? So it's kind of interesting to get the comparison. What are your thoughts on the question?
Well, I think what Isabel said is absolutely correct. I mean, the British government's up till now, the British government or the whole of the UK has really relied on importing things like raw materials for anything, raw materials particularly, and with those imports, we now know comes somebody else's carbon emissions, which we have no control over. It comes with somebody else's child labour issues. It comes with unknowns that we no longer can accept. And I think the ESG, Isabel's already said it, but it's three words, not one. We've got to make sure the environment is looked after, the social issues are looked after, and the governance issues are looked after. And really, that makes it absolutely imperative that if we can have an opportunity to have our own raw material supply here, then we should do, because we are a country which upholds ethical standards very, very highly. If we hadn't got any of the right geology, then we might as well forget it. But fortunately for the UK, we actually have got some of the right geology, and therefore, we should start to look at the opportunity of a secure supply which we know what the emissions are, we know what the social aspects are, and we also have a security. I mean, obviously, the major issue that has also come along with ASG is reliance on trading partners, and Brexit and COVID-19 have thrown those two into massive sharp relief. Can you anymore rely on a party who's supplying you from thousands of miles away? Absolutely not. So they may have shut down their economy. They may not. They may weaponize raw materials, as China has already done with rare earths. So all this is, if it wasn't electric vehicles, is a big enough imperative. It's all that associated raw material supply and supply chain as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned something about, with ESG front and center, it's not just about my ESG footprint, but the materials that are coming to me. What's the footprint of those as well? And it's really important to get on top of that. And for us, my thinking on this is visibility is key there. Being able to show and prove up and down the supply chain what the footprints are. Daniel, you and I have spoken before about your thoughts on traceability in battery supply chains, and particularly the further upstream you go. And that's sort of linked to the security of supply question. What's your thinking at the moment on where the industry is right now, both in the global perspective, but also in the local perspective, like we're talking about now?
Yeah, I think first of all, Isabel and Jeremy have answered the question, extremely well on ESG. I think they're quite exactly right. Europe is at the forefront of trying to change this, grow the market, and build something that we believe is cleaner. And it is environmental, social, and governance, and traceability obviously is a huge portion of that. As we've touched on today, most of the manufacturing to date is done Asia, North America, South America, and a lot of the raw materials from Australia or Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Usually they are thrown into the mix. They all come out as one final product, and they are distributed throughout the supply chain. So traceability and vision and visibility on where that material come from is often hard. I think over the last 2 years, we've certainly seen out of the DRC, for example, has been a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of the mining industry on how we can start to do things better, and certainly prove that throughout the supply chain visibility. Technology these days is moving forward. You've got the rise of blockchain and the rise of digitization, which does enable us now to really look closely at what we are doing in the supply chain. And right from Jeremy through to ourselves as a midstream processor and up to the end user like BritishVolt, it's important that we all play our part, and each point in that supply chain, we are very clear and transparent on what our carbon footprint is, where that material's being sourced, and how we've got to the point we are as it leaves our door.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. Cobalt and Congo and other materials from Congo have actually come up a couple of times in this talk so far. What are the opinions on the panel around artisanal material and whether it should be excluded from the supply chain or whether the effort should continue to include it? Does anyone want to take that question first?
I'm happy to start if you like. I've spent quite a lot of time working around the globe. Personally, I find artisanal is extremely important. I think, certainly as a precursor for where we're looking for gold mineralization, for example, the artisanal can be extremely helpful. They're very good at finding the minerals, exploiting the minerals, and obviously transporting it. Again, I think more can be done in making sure that it's ethical, it's safe, it's secure. But I think it's a good life source and a good money for the local community. So it's something we should encourage and do in collaboration as opposed to just outright banning. Jeremy, knowing your background, I'm sure you've got a few comments you'd like to add.
Yeah, look, I think that you're absolutely right, Daniel, that the artisanals rely on an income from that, so that shouldn't be stopped. But the trouble is, a lot of the artisanal activity is unregulated, and a lot of artisanal miners die regularly. And whether we want to incorporate that material without knowing where it comes from into our battery supply chain is a massive question. Can a car manufacturer happily import cobalt from the DRC, knowing that some of it may have come from a mine which has collapsed and killed 50 people? It's a massive problem. So far be it much better if we can regulate that and produce it in a regulated manner.
Isabel, what are your thoughts, and what are BritishVolt's thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with both Jeremy and Daniel in that avoidance isn't the way to go, because all you're doing is throwing a bunch of people out of work that don't have much in the first place. And I would much rather think that activities in the West to drive this electrified revolution can create upstream benefits in the supply chain that makes everybody's life easier. So I think that increasing the adoption of IT in these areas, so we've got the tools that we need to enact the traceability on the materials. I think that's a really important point. And working with the artisanal miners to improve the health and safety and make sure that we've only got people above a certain age going and doing the mining, I think is absolutely critical, because we've got to make sure that these economies and these populations actually benefit from the increase in what's happening, in Western countries, so that we can improve lives around the globe if we get this right. I think that's a really, really critical thing that we've got to think about long and hard, not just turning our backs.
Yeah, I fully agree. And for me, it still comes down to visibility. One, to be able to prove that your footprint is ESG friendly and therefore receive the benefit, but two, to be able to show that the value is being passed down to the right people, right, in the right way. And that comes down to, as people have said, visibility and the right use of the processes and the technology and the people that you have. And feeding into this is also the security of supply issue. One of the questions that's come in has been around, what do we see about upcoming supply chain problems? And what's interesting about this market is we have forecast tightening in a lot of the battery metals, but also a change in the supply chain itself and how the value chain is going. And there are many instances at the moment, we can see almost every week a new deal being booked by a consumer or a processor for long-term material. Tesla, for example, looking at mines and so on. So security of supply, I think, is a huge one as well. Starting with you, Isabel, what do you see as upcoming supply chain problems of this nature that we should be most focused on?
Well, I think it falls into a couple of areas, really. So is there enough reserves to go around? And I think in the majority of cases there are. It's, can you actually encourage the mining companies to invest and exploit those reserves and get them out onto the market? I think that's probably one of the bigger bottlenecks. So from our perspective, we are looking right upstream to nickel mines and refining, and making sure that we invest time, effort and funds further upstream, so we get the reciprocal benefit and preferential access to those resources and those reserves. So that's one element that we're really starting to focus on. But it's not just about the raw mats, it's actually about the conversion processes and the capacity that's available. So in the mid-2020s, we're starting to see a considerable constraint on cathode material manufacturing, especially here in Europe, because traditionally it's been done in China. So looking at that co-location piece, it's an opportunity for us to add additional cathode material manufacturing capacity, as well as anode manufacturing capacity as well. We can't forget the anode. And if you look at the companies that need to invest in that field, they're trying to put plants up as quickly as they can. They can't afford to continue to pay to put the plants up. They are going to be capital constrained at some point in the future. So co-investment and joint ventures is the way that we're looking at this, and making sure that we have partners very close to us, but also partners that we are assisting to get the capacity stood up as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's very important that people talk to each other in this supply chain, right? We're building new ones.
Collaboration is key. I've always said it.
Looking specifically, something that interests me on lithium, I wanted to ask Daniel about this. With so much processing capacity for lithium in China, what does that mean for the European gigafactories and local supply chains? Because it really is, out of all the materials, one of the ones that's so heavily geared in the midstream, and that's the area that you're working in. So what are your thoughts on how we approach this?
Yeah, I think it's important, again, just to stress that obviously China is a major producer, but you also have South Korea, Japan, North America, South America. So there's a lot of product going around that is battery grade and could end up in Europe. But ultimately, Europe isn't the only market that's expanding. We're going from negligible today to a big demand by 2030, but so is China, so is Japan, South Korea, North America. I think the world is electrifying. And over the last 12 months, it's been really interesting just to see how quickly that consumer behavior has changed. So I think there is an opportunity here. Europe is exciting, and people see it as exciting. It is the fastest growing market today, and we are seeing a lot of investment already. And Isabel hit the nail on the head. Going into the midstream, you've got a lot of money going into batteries, cathodes, but it's not always filtering all the way up the value chain into where the raw materials are necessary. And again, there's Jeremy is doing a fantastic job here in the UK. You've got others across Europe that are doing similar, trying to find and bring together these resources that can supply this chain. But if you're going to send those materials back to Asia to convert and upgrade, it just doesn't quite meet the demands here. So as we said, I think there's a good opportunity, and the market's big enough. Say if every project in Europe was to come online, you've got about 220,000 tons of supply, and we need roughly around 360. So there's a good opportunity there for new entrants to come in and be a part of this value chain and bring some of that value into the European Union, and the UK.
Yeah, and to bring on local supply like our friend Jeremy at the top of the screen.
Absolutely.
Here. Well, in the commodities markets, there's moving the conversation on a little bit to the frameworks and regulations around what we're talking about. It's looking at the potential of history repeating. I've certainly seen many occasions where frameworks were designed and they weren't fit for purpose. They were not. They started to suffocate a little bit the underlying objectives of the business and the industry around. And in the case of net zero and these ESG footprints, what's exciting is with all of the energy behind this, and the industry is really taking that leadership role to define those best in class standards and leverage technology to make sure that it's fit for purpose. And I think that's particularly exciting because the industry is moving fast enough to start setting those standards rather than waiting for regulation, which I think is important. It needs to run alongside. And one topic that's in play at the moment is the rules of origin conversation that we're having. And these rules of origin, obviously, they establish the economic nationality of the goods, but importantly, that feeds through to the tariffs applied on them and the trade policies around. I'd be interested to start with Jeremy. What are your thoughts on rules of origin specifically for the UK EV supply chain? Is the industry ready for this? And what are the things that we need to look out for when it comes to rules of origin?
Well, I think rules of origin is something that's burst upon the UK since Brexit, and a lot of it was not recognised beforehand. We now have a set of rules which we have to abide by. I think that there will be university courses in the complexity of this going forward. It's horrifically complicated. But broadly speaking, as far as I understand it, certainly going to 2024 to 26, 45% of an electric vehicle will need to be sourced from either the UK or Europe. And then from 2027 onwards, 55%. Bearing in mind that the battery pack is between 40 and 50% of an electric vehicle, and 30% of that is raw materials. It is a massive, massive issue, because if you can't source the raw materials in the UK or Europe, and let's start from the point that at the moment, the whole of Europe produces zero lithium, battery grade lithium. It is a huge problem, and really something that politicians have previously had the luxury of either ignoring or not recognizing. So it is, from my point of view, it's always been, why don't we build megafactories in the UK? It's a wonderful place to be. But if you can supply the raw materials into that and build the materials domestically, it supports the UK automotive industry, as Isabel said. The other way of looking at it is, if we don't build the batteries here, we don't build the raw material supplies here, the automotive industry will disappear. So it is so profound, not just for Europe, but also for the UK. And that's why, I say again, if they've got the right geology, and we have, we should start looking to see if we can build that supply chain.
Mm. Well, I think it might be interesting to go to Isabel here, because you talked earlier on, Isabel, about the impact, that BritishVolt intends to have. It's obviously going to be a lot of work managing things like rules of origin that Jeremy has sort of given us some information on. Can you give us a little bit more kind of color on why is it worth it? What's the value creation for the industry, for the nation, that's going to be brought by us overcoming these obstacles and making it work?
So I had a little advantage in that I was indirectly consulted on what the rules of origin percentages should be. That was last year. So I managed to build our strategy around that to a certain degree. So I had a fair idea of what was rattling down the pipe towards us, although the final conditions of that weren't known until the TCA was signed with the European Union. And of course, the European Union played a blinder on this because they've not allowed diagonal accumulation. So even though we've got a free trade agreement with Korea and Japan, you cannot import cathode active material into a cell manufacturer in the UK, build the cells, put them into a vehicle, because the vehicle will be exposed to 10% tariffs. I spend a lot of my time explaining this to the automotive manufacturers because they still can't quite get their head around it sometimes. So that really gives us an opportunity to build additional value outside of the headline, the sign above the door that says gigaplant. That supply chain piece is really vital to the UK. And the really interesting thing about it is we have an extremely strong chemical sector. So those conversion processes, this is not new to the chemicals industry. They know how to do this. And we're in a really, really strong position because we've got assets around the country that can be modified, upgraded, or changed to accommodate those conversion processes. And we've also got the technical capability to deliver on it. So if you're talking about gross value add as far as the UK economy is concerned, if we have the right approach from government and the right support from government, we're in a position, an enviable position, of being able to accelerate into those feed streams that go into the battery industry and make sure that we can capitalize on that. It even comes to a really strange one in that the diagonal accumulation works against the European battery manufacturers wanting to sell to UK companies. So if the cathode material is resourced outside of the European Union, built into a battery inside the European Union, and then goes into a vehicle in the UK, and then you export that vehicle back to Europe again, you've still got the problem of tariffs. So that's really driving an advantage as far as the UK is concerned, in my opinion, because we have the expertise, because we have the power to reimagine those conversion processes to make them more efficient. We actually now will have the opportunity to export ESG compliant as well as rules of origin compliant materials back to the cell manufacturers in Europe. So it's bigger than just supplying BritishVolt. You'll be, the industry will be in a position to supply Samsung, LG, CATL, Northvolt, all the other companies that will need these materials to make sure that they're abiding to regulations.
That's very interesting. It's an area that I hadn't come across before. It's very useful to have that inside view that you have. I think that one of the things that's coming in from some of the audience around questions is about, we talk about an integrated, joined up approach across the supply chain players. What would that actually look like practically? Right, because it's easy to talk about it in conceptual terms, but Daniel, you sit right in the middle. What would you say are the immediate next steps for us to be working together across the supply chain in a way that we can say that we're working integrated as opposed to at arm's length?
There's obviously a lot of policies and everything going together that we can make this work. But as a simplified answer, you got Jeremy has raw materials, we have conversion capabilities, and then Isabel's your direct consumer. So I think on this call here, you have a pretty good integrated system that could work. Jeremy obviously has a plan to take his product through to a battery grade, but what that battery grade might look like, is it carbonate, is it hydroxide, are we moving to a lithium ion phosphate? There's a lot of different materials and battery assemblies. That means that even like us as a midstream player, we can take Jeremy's product and maybe convert it into something else that Isabel can use directly. So there's plenty of room there for us to integrate and basically work together. Just to bring SAFE into this, your supply chain technology that allows us to have transparency and traceability is something else as a UK industry that can help us, again, tie all this together and put a good logical digital solution into how we can, again, integrate and provide visibility.
Yeah, and Jeremy, coming back to you, bringing up a mine in the UK, that's not been done a lot recently. Is the UK ready for a project like that? And more broadly, is the UK ready to bring this integrated lithium supply chain onshore? And that as a proxy to other supply chains. But with your experience in lithium, where are we in the journey?
We're relatively early in the journey, but I think bear it in mind that the Cornwall has had a 4,000-year mining history. It's still a very large producer of raw materials in the form of china clay. still produces 600,000 tons of china clay a year from a big mining industry, which is still very much part of the Cornish landscape. And most people a lot of people in Cornwall are very proud of that mining history. And so it is the natural place to mine. The mining we would be doing is very, very low impact. We are a company that's very focused on low carbon, on doing things properly. We secured a technology which can produce lithium from granitic material without roasting. That's most important. Most of the material from spodumene is using roasting. That's a high carbon emitting industry. So and also a lot of our material will come from the brine, which is zero carbon. So it's reimagineering or imagineering how the UK could regain its mining legacy. And it's not just, it fits into this integrated value add. That's the most important thing. If we don't do this, then somebody else will, and they'll get that value add for their own economy, and we'll end up worrying about our security of supply, worrying about fluctuating prices, worrying about quality. I thought it's one of those things where we are exploring the possibilities of it. We're very excited about what we see so far, because everyone thought I was a completely crazy man before. Maybe they still do, but it was. Can we do it? And is the geology right? And the answer is yes, we can. The geology is right, and we're on a journey towards capturing that value add for the UK and securing that supply chain. So I think we can do it.
No, it's very interesting, very, very motivating speech there, Jeremy. Appreciate it. They got me all goosebumps here. We talked a lot about the primary material flow supply chain, and there is something to be discussed around recycling. And obviously, as ESG comes into the picture, as security of supply comes into the picture, people's eyes do turn to recycling and what that means. Isabel, what's your read on the real situation with recycling? The figures that we see out there, how reliable are they? How does recycling fit in the short, medium, or long term to this whole picture?
Well, I think I'd sort of start with the back end of that first. I think it's really, really important in the longer term. I mean, we're never going to get to the levels of lead acid recycling where something like 96 or 97% of the lead used in lead acid batteries just gets regurgitated in the process back into new cells. It just doesn't work like that. The chemistry doesn't work like that in lithium ion. So there's a bit of a limit on what you can do. So it's really important to differentiate between battery recycled materials that go back into the manufacturing process and recycled materials that come from other streams that you can include into the battery manufacturing process. So if you're looking at the actual materials that come out of batteries and how much you can recycle, you're looking at around about 25 to 30% realistically. It's physics, it's chemistry at the end of the day. We can't alter those things. So I do see numbers up to 50% that have been quoted, or even higher numbers. And really, to get to those levels of recycled materials, you have to bring in other feedstocks from other industries and other recycling streams to be able to achieve that. And also some of the timing that you see. Now, we want to get to 50% recycled materials by 2025. How on earth do you do that when you're making cells and packs, sticking them out in the market, and they don't come back for 10 years? So I don't quite understand how you can justifiably make those very outlandish claims. I think the really important thing to understand about recycling is that because we've got a 10-year life of packs going out before they come back, we're still not getting the battery packs back in significant volumes to make it viable to stand up a recycling facility today. So this is likely to happen in the second half of this decade. And that really is quite useful because it gives us an opportunity to work with the companies that are working on the recycling technology to make sure it's right and it's got the right environmental credentials and can be done efficiently and cost effectively, so that we can then take those materials and use them as a feedstock in the cathode active material manufacturing process and then separate out the metals. And really we're starting to challenge some of those processes and saying, look, you go through several different stages and you come back to a high purity elemental metal. Is there a stage that you pass through that we can actually pick up and just use that solution in some of the manufacturing processes without having to go all the way around the loop. So it's the efficiency piece. It's making sure you pick up the right material in the right form at the right point in the recycling process and feed it at the right point into the manufacturing process. And that's not an easy thing to get right.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Speaking of things that are easy to get right, we have one more question that comes in, and I know I'm not the person to answer this, but I'll put it out there to the group and see who puts their hands up first. So I'm going to read it out verbatim. The traditional vehicle manufacturers are busy aligning their EV strategies to the challenge posed by new entrants. Just recently, VW has gone as far as stating it intends to transition to a single platform, SSP, for the majority of future EV models. Taking account of this change, what impact do the panelists think it will have on the post-2030 split of battery types, cylindrical, prismatic, pouch, used in the EV market? Now, I'm lost by the time we get to the word cylindrical. But are there any of you panelists who have some thoughts on that? What would be the impact of this on the battery types that actually are used in the EV market as a standard?
I mean, I have some very, very sort of historical views of this and a very good view, but maybe Daniel and Jeremy, if you have anything you want to say first.
What?
No.
Jeremy, please.
I think that falls firmly in your lap, Isabel, I'm afraid.
Right. So I think this cylindrical pouch prismatic conundrum has been going around inside the tumble dryer for 20 years, and you get different OEMs have different views. Now, VW have been very, very clear on their unified cell strategy, and that's a prismatic strategy moving forwards. And that's great if you've got multiple brands and a vehicle platform of which you've just got different hats on it in effect. So think ID3 and ID4, but then how that permeates out into some of the Skoda product ranges and how that permeates out into some of the Seat product ranges as well. So what you can do is you can consolidate your technical requirements, because all those vehicles have got very, very similar driving dynamics. So you've got a huge volume of vehicles going out to the door. You can really standardize on that cell and use it across multiple vehicles on the same platform. Not every manufacturer has that. And if we start taking standardization too far, you lose diversity within the application capabilities. So you need to open that diversity back out again. So I heard sort of 5 years ago, people were talking about, some of the VDA standards that were coming out of Germany and how this is going to be the way forwards. Everybody's going to be using a standard cell. My big question is, if you open the bonnet of your Ferrari and open the bonnet of your Fiat and you find the same stuff inside, you start to question why you're spending 250,000 euros or pounds on one vehicle and only 40,000 on another. Brand differentiation, driving dynamics are going to be really, really important. And even the VW group will not use that unified cell all the way across its product range because it will not work. You couldn't put those cells into a Porsche Taycan for sure. Otherwise, people will start to be asking, why doesn't my VW ID3 drive like a Porsche Taycan? Why can't I have the same power? So you're going to have different attributes are going to be very much geared towards different brand attributes and different bell curves of supply in the automotive industry. So I can see why VW have done it, and I agree with their strategy because of their positioning in the marketplace. But for everybody else who hasn't got that advantage of multiple platform strategies and multiple brands, you're going to be looking at differentiated products going into different vehicles because their performance attributes are very much tailored towards what the customers walking into the showrooms are expecting to buy and receive by way of a product. So I don't think it's all going to go down to one. I think if I'm going to stick my finger in the air and have a guess, I would say that cylindrical and prismatic and pouch are going to be the mainstays of the industry in the volume markets, and I think that the high performance and the niche players will probably stay on the larger format cylindrical.
Okay, that's fascinating. I mean, for me personally, what strikes me as important there was the word differentiation. And if there's no differentiation, then our favorite TV shows that are reporting on cars will no longer have anything to say in them. So, I'll be very disappointed, but it's very interesting to hear your answer. Look, today we've got a couple more minutes left, but any final thoughts? We've talked about an integrated approach, local supply chains to meet our ESG needs, managing the security of supply and changes that are going on in the legal regulatory frameworks as well as the physical marketplace. Jeremy, are there any thoughts that you would like to leave us with before we close off the webinar?
I think very quickly, I think that, I'd leave people with the thoughts that this is a strategically important time we're going into. This is nothing like we've experienced before because of Brexit and because of the COVID crisis and because of Chinese and other trade wars. And really, it is important that we think strategically as a nation about what this means for the UK, what this means for the UK automotive, what it means for UK science, and really what it means for the UK economy. The opportunity to capture that value chain right through from the raw materials, hopefully right through to the battery materials and the batteries themselves and the electric vehicles is of vital importance. And really it's reimagining how that might look. And it's got to be done really quickly. That's the scary thing. So we all need to put our best foot forward.
Thank you, Jeremy. Daniel, what would you like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think Jeremy and Isabel have touched on it a little bit already. I think there is a big challenge ahead. We do have to be quick, but I think we've also got a really good starting block. There is an abundance of talent here. I say there's a long history in mining, chemical, and of course with the renewable energy. I think Europe and the UK in particular are in an extremely good position. You talk about this position up in Blythe there, where you're almost 70% renewable. You've got new technology coming in with green hydrogen, for example, from the wind farms that are offshore. We can start utilising that and reducing carbon footprint even further. So I think, although there is a challenge ahead, we do have the right starting blocks to really push on and make a real difference in the near term.
Fantastic. Isabel, the same. You have 30 seconds.
So two things really. I think that the expectation that battery prices are going to be half of what they are today, considering it's a constrained market and raw materials are going to be a challenge moving forwards, is a myth that needs to be dispelled. Because it's just not going to happen. The market doesn't work like that. And the other thing to point out is that the EV industry is often bashed over the head with the comparison with internal combustion engine and cost parity and performance parity and range parity. Don't forget, you can't buy an internal combustion engine vehicle in the UK from 2030, and hybrids are being outlawed from 2035. So your comparator is going to disappear. So we have to focus on making sure this is a system that works and works for everybody and can deliver a usable system that is going to help to get everybody to move around in an environmentally conscious way. It's coming.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. Okay, then our 45 minutes are up now. So I think I'll close off this discussion now with a thank you to Isabel Sheldon from BritishVolt, to Jeremy Rathel from Cornish Lithium, to Daniel Bloor from Livista. Thanks so much for your time. It's been a fascinating conversation. And thanks to Automotive EV for managing and setting up this call. Thanks again to everyone who joined today, and everyone on the call. We're all nice people. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Peter again, and thank you for watching the session. Don't forget to send messages to each other and start to build relationships for the future. Also, take a look at our supplier showrooms. Our partners have got lots of products and services that they have to offer, which again could be of benefit to you. Make the most of the opportunity, and thank you again for joining us.